Okay, recording is on.
Hello and good afternoon to a new CRID Webinar Series today with a special guest that we have on board today. So I'd like to welcome everyone on board to a new CRID Webinar Series. Let me give you, as a start, let me give you a brief introduction about our guest today, who is Dr. Sami Ibrahim. He's a policy and strategy advisor at the Executive Council Government of Dubai, where he oversees the development and implementation of the Emirates Urban Development Agenda. His latest involvements include the Dubai 2040 Urban Master Plan and the Dubai Bicycle Friendly City Strategy 2020, so for 2025. He's also currently involved in the development of Dubai's 2030 strategic plan. Prior to his position, Dr. Sami was an urban planner in the Lebanese Ministry of Environment, where he was involved in the development of the national and several local spatial plans. Alongside his professional career, his research activity focuses on urban policy and transitional urbanism. Dr. Sami holds a PhD in urban planning from the Paris School of Urban Planning. So I would like to welcome Dr. Sami Ibrahim with us today, and I'm looking forward to a very special webinar. And would like to also benefit from his experience as an advisor and strategy advisor for the urban image of the city. I would like to remind the attendee, if you have any questions, please type in your questions in the Q&A section, or you can send your questions to me privately. This is just a brief introduction. I'm sure Dr. Sami has a lot more to offer in the talk. So Dr. Sami, I think that's all from my side for now. So the stage is yours.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, George, for having me today. It's a pleasure. And hopefully all the attendees will enjoy this session as well. Should I switch to, I'll switch to full screen mode?
Yes, please, to the presentation. Share the file.
Yes. And
the pleasure is all ours, Dr. Ibrahim.
Thank you.
Yeah, all is working.
Perfect. Thank you. Today's session would be around the future cities or cities of the future. I like to play with the words. Sometimes it's interesting. The mental exercise seems interesting when we think about the future of our cities. And when we say future cities, does it always bring the proper or the right aspect of what we would like to see, I would say, in the cities, in our cities in the future. To start with the conversation, I maybe want to define a term or a word, which is posture. Posture is an attitude towards something. It basically reflects your point of view, and you may ask yourself why I'm defining this word. I would show you three pictures. Some of you might know these people, some of you don't, but I'm gonna tell you why I'm showing these people. So these are three pictures of three people that somehow had and still have an impact on our cities and the way we think about the cities in the future. The first might be, or we might call him a theorist. The second is known to be a master builder, and the third, the only lady, is known to be an activist. So who are these people? I mean, the first picture, I'm showing you the portrait of Sir Ebenezer Howard. He's an English urban planner, And in the beginning of the 20th century, this person somehow invented, unfortunately, if we want to call it, I would say he invented the garden city movement that looks today like urban sprawl. So he invented somehow the suburbs 100 or 120 years ago. But on the basis of that thinking process was a goodwill, or is a goodwill, where he wanted for people to live in harmony with nature and to ensure balance between their work, their work and personal life that can come in harmony through nature. The second person is Robert Moses. So this guy is known as the master builder of New York. His work started around the 1920s in New York metropolitan area until the late 60s and early 70s. And throughout his work, he pushed for highways or for solutions for urban challenges through mobility, or mobility solutions for our urban challenges based on the use of private cars. And then, of course, Jane Jacobs is known to be an activist who fought against the ideas of Robert Moses, and ended up writing, the best of what she produced would be The Death and Life of Great American Cities, where she debates the importance of the human scale and the use of sidewalks and the importance of people before cars. These three, then how to link these three pictures to what I just said on posture. Those three people, again, work in the same field, which is cities, how we develop cities, how we think of the future of our cities. And then through their posture or their different attitudes, each one of them gave a different solution or point of view of what we could have done. And based on that, I asked that question regarding future cities or cities of the future. Are we thinking the right way when we plan and think the future of our cities? I'll also show you, why I'm asking, or I'm showing you that, because I'll show you a few pictures. And then you would build the argument with me along these pictures. This picture goes to Le Corbusier, the plan voisin that was suggested or proposed for Paris in 1925, and that was rejected back then. But then put yourself in his shoes back in 1925, thinking of the modernity of the city, and the solution was maybe fluidity. And the gaining importance of the use of private vehicles. 1937, this is how we were imagining the city of tomorrow. Funny enough, it was an advertisement by Shell, who their core business would be selling fuel or gas to cars. But then again, if we look at the picture, that future city is also based on highways and the use of private vehicles and encouraging urban sprawl. Few years, 20 years down the road, again 1959, this is how architects were developing, were imagining the cities of the future, always depending on highways and the use of that same mode of transport, which is cars, that would give the perfect result when it comes to fluidity and mobility of the traffic. And also at the same time, the luxury or certain quality of life, because owning a private vehicle would be seen as a way of having a good quality of life. 1998, that's the front page of LA Times magazine. Again, I mean, projecting how would Los Angeles would look like, not in 100 years, I mean, just in 2013. Again, that same hyper modern image of the city with these, they changed in the shape. They became like more futuristic cars, but it's always based on that same use of transportation, which is private vehicles. In 2005, again, Ford gave us a hint on how would future cities would look like, the city of tomorrow. Again, it's based on that smart aspect, on that artificial intelligence aspect, but again, I mean, you can see that cars are given the priority, but then in that picture, pedestrians would be walking on a higher level to avoid the risk of vehicles. And then this guy came in 2018, global cities or global city, again, Elon Musk, as being this futuristic person that's bringing the ultimate solution for our cities in the future. But don't forget that he's still selling, I mean, cars, electric vehicles. Even if they are electric, they're still personal vehicles, and that's reality. That's LA in 2019. I mean, it was pictured for us in 2013 as it would be like the ultimate smart city, but in reality, we kept on stacking cars. So maybe 120 years, we've been selling that dream of the future city, but it didn't really change as we've been doing business as usual. Again, I mean, even if it's an electric vehicle or smart vehicle, it's still a vehicle that would occupy the same space on the street. It would not solve our issue. And with the growing population, with the ease of getting or accessing to private vehicles, we're basically amplifying the same challenge. And of course, we all know the solution. I mean, you've seen this picture many times. Even if it's an electric vehicle or a vehicle, as I said, it still uses the same space on the street. If we really want to move forward with that paradigm, or with that challenge, we need a paradigm shift in urban planning, especially in urban mobility. We need to shift to alternative or soft mobility patterns, basically walking, cycling, public transportation, or mass transit transportation. To do so, it cannot happen by itself, because it's also linked to the pattern of the city or the urban morphology. I mean, with more urban sprawl, less densities, people would still prefer their private vehicles. And for the one providing public transportation, it would be less and less beneficial from an economic perspective, because low density means more distance to cover and then less customers and more time to offer the same service. So I would say that was our challenge, or that was our typical thinking until, I mean, and all this results in basically the same issues in terms of traffic safety, congestion, more urban sprawl, less personal security, and then, of course, high impact on high pollution, high impact on climate change, and then, of course, the high impact on mental health in terms of stress and work-life balance. That was, and that is still, I would say, the scenario or status quo until this came. In December 2019, the world had stopped, at least for a few months, with the hit of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the responses, I can say that we can categorize the responses to the COVID-19 pandemic into three responses. The public health or the health response, where we needed to provide enough beds, enough respiratory machines for people to survive. The second response is more related to security and safety, to make sure we maintain public order in the cities. But the third and most important response, and maybe the most difficult one, is the urban response, because suddenly all the infrastructure that we've been building, which is basically roads, and the use of private vehicles to achieve our daily needs stopped, and we couldn't use it because of the lockdown. And then these are a few titles that you can easily find when people started to think of challenges related to the COVID-19 crisis on cities. What would happen to cities? Would they still be attractive? Because people were trying to avoid these dense places, because we thought that with high density there would be higher spread of the COVID-19. And then throughout the lockdown, some cities were courageous enough to try to implement some solutions, because we were not using our cars. And then suddenly we saw the amount of dead spaces in our streets. This is in Italy, where basically that same street was transformed or given less importance to the use of cars and more importance to alternative modes, basically cycling. Because if you do remember, during the lockdown, especially European cities were giving their inhabitants a certain limit to their movement, which was ranging between 800 and 1 kilometer, where they can exercise or go do their shopping. And then it saw a peak in the sales of bicycles, especially in Milan and Paris. And on the picture on the right, we can see how even some cities transformed some dead spaces to some public spaces, because people needed to breathe. People were stuck in tiny apartments, in small houses, and they needed somewhere to walk, to stretch their legs, even to breathe, just to let down all the stress that came with the COVID-19. We've also seen cities that took medium to long-term measures and transforming those short-term solutions into long-term solutions, giving more importance to cycling, to alternative modes of transportation. This is also in Paris, because Paris saw a big chance for them to implement their cycling strategy after the lockdown, and literally transforming the city from a network of streets to a network of cycling lanes, which is still happening. And if you know people that live in Paris and you ask them, if they use their car, they're super unhappy, because giving less importance to cars means more traffic jams. But people who are using their bicycles are much more happy, because they feel empowered in their cities. And then again, thinkers, researchers try to put together all these different solutions, and we've seen some concepts emerging, and especially that 15-minute city, the 15-minute city concept that basically emerged with the city of Paris, but then other cities, basically North American cities and Australian cities, because they are different in terms of urban planning pattern or in their urban morphologies, so that maybe that 15-minute European 15-minute city is very difficult to achieve. So they try to adapt that same concept, and we've seen different concepts called the 20-minute neighborhood. I mean, regardless what you would name it, it is interesting to see why and what are the elements, regardless if it's a 15-minute city or a 20-minute neighborhood, that these cities are trying to achieve. And going back to that first question, and to what I've shown you throughout the pictures, in that new formula for the solution, obviously one major element is out of the equation. That's cars, basically. Because either if it's 20-minute or a 15-minute city, it seems that cities are now not anymore buying that image of the future city based on hypermobility, based on private vehicles, on smart and on EVs. They are looking into a more human-centric approach, where there's enough population density, where there's enough activities, so people can cycle, can walk to work, or even to do their daily activities. This being said, I will try to, I would not give recommendations, of course, but I would try to summarize all the knowledge that was developed throughout this year and a half after the COVID-19 into three potential areas that city researchers, urban planners, architects, thinkers, policymakers need to think of. Whoever is interested in developing our cities need to think of in terms of solutions. The first is rethinking our outdoor built environment. It's obvious that we need to rethink the space, how the space is distributed on our streets. This first picture on the left it's a beautiful picture that comes from a city in Brazil, where they deprioritized the use of cars and gave more priority to the public realm. We've also seen cities extending the sidewalk, and there should be a proper analysis of the use of the sidewalk, especially, and I imagine we've all lived this throughout the COVID lockdown, and after that, the increased amount of deliveries. And if you want to push that thinking even more, the use of contactless deliveries. More pickups, more small size trucks need to enter the cities. They need to find the proper space to park and then deliver those packages. Now we have more people cycling, and then we need to rethink the way we distribute that space in the street, again, to give more priority to people and less priority to cars. So that's a major area of future research that we can work on. The second would be decentralizing what I call our critical urban infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, people would think that I'm talking about maybe sewage or telecom infrastructure, or like the streets by themselves. But actually, the lockdown showed us that there's other important or critical elements in the urban infrastructure that we need to properly develop to respond to our growing needs. You also can imagine, and maybe you lived that throughout the lockdown. You were locked in an apartment with a tiny balcony, and you were not allowed to go outside. And how many times you said, oh, I wish there was at least like a green space that I can reach to. And I think in the continuity of that idea, I would pledge for a new way of thinking, which is less is more. Instead of thinking of a less is more approach, we need to shift toward a less and more approach, less distance and more infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean the green spaces or the green pockets that need to be easily accessible, and especially within dense neighborhoods, but also the local markets where you can go get your grocery, your daily items without requiring the use of private cars. And then the last idea would be around building the digital environment culture. We've almost all of us switched, or few days a week, you switch to remote working or distance learning. And some of us saw in that an advantage, a benefit, because it gives less stress. And you've seen and you've heard the story of Zoom stocks that the price increased by 100 or 150%, I'm not sure, just like 3 or 4 months after the lockdown, because people needed that infrastructure to be there. And specifically in I would say in the digital environment culture, there's a focus on mapping and the importance of mapping for urban planners and architects and people who work on cities. How many times you've checked that first map on the left side, on the upper left side, that shows the density of the COVID cases, and the difference where you can compare the numbers, you can understand the spread of the COVID-19. I mean, more than 100 years ago, when cities used to face what we call now traditional pandemics, the sewage, the sanitation system, the sewage was the solution to survive those pandemics. And I pledge today that the digital infrastructure is that sanitation system for today. Imagine what you can do now with all the technology, with the use of GIS and applying that to your daily needs. On the right side, this is an open data platform from the city of Paris that, for example, shows you the location of third places or co-working spaces, since people are working remotely and they need to be and might not need to be in their offices, but also don't want to be in their homes, or they don't have enough space in their home to host an office. So this kind of services, for example, is offering Parisians today a fast and smart way to locate the nearest co-working space, its availability, if it has, for example, an access to high-speed internet. Same for the cycling network that's being treated today as a major asset for cities who are developing their cycling networks, where you can literally now monitor traffic, I mean cycling traffic, and not only vehicles traffic, because of that massive shift to the use of bicycles. So these three ideas, I would think, are very important to keep in mind and to have when thinking of the future of our cities. And to end, I started with talking about future cities and cities of the future. And again, I think that the future cities, the way that have been showed to us for the last 100 years, are not the same cities that we need for the future. Whether you call it, or whether would you like to call it a smart city, sustainable city, a safe city, a global city, the most important thing that it has to be a livable city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sami. It's an honor to have you with us today. And I would like to, first of all, thank you for the informative lecture, informative talk. And I would like to maybe start with the first question that may be a bit expected. Again, as it's honor for us to have such as advisor for the government with us today. Being in such a position, Dr. Sami, what do you think was the main challenge that you had, and how did you overcome this challenge when it comes to thinking about the strategy of planning the city for the future?
I mean, Dubai is not different from the other cities. I've been working for the Executive Council as an urban development advisor for the last 6 years now, where our main challenge is to make sure that Dubai is future-proof. And I think regardless all the critiques that you can address to the city of Dubai, that is heavily reliant on private vehicles, or that it has a high percentage of urban sprawl. The city is working and is developing toward a more livable city in the future. And the latest announcement, which is the Dubai 2040 Urban Master Plan, shows that Dubai is really keen to develop towards a more livable city before being sustainable or smart. Today the challenge in Dubai is to convince people actually that there is alternatives for the use of private vehicles in cities like Dubai. Yes, it's hot, but I mean, it's hot for 6 months, but for the remaining 6 months of the year, it's a pleasant walk because it's almost 25 to 26 or 27 degrees. Yet again, the metro network or the mass transit network is not fully developed, but we've seen some nice developments around the metro, and which gives you enough options to live and work. And today, with all the work that the Roads and Transport Authority is doing, pretty soon, I mean, we already have the e-scooters and the e-bike, the sharing bike schemes in the city. And in the coming 2 or 3 years or so, they would really become a proper mode of transport as we're pushing people to use it, because if the main thing that would push people to use this kind of mobility alternatives is to provide the infrastructure. Once the infrastructure is there, people would move toward those modes of transport. But then going to the main challenge, again, as I said, is not related to the work itself, is related to the way of thinking, and how to convince people to get out of their comfort zone, to think of alternatives.
All right, thank you. We do have a question from Shahram. So she would like to know your opinion about the line project in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to answer that. We don't have enough information on that project. All what we've seen is the few advertisement material that went out to the public. But again, I mean, the answer relies in history. go back to that garden city movement. The solution, there was a goodwill in that solution. And then linking those different cities was supposed to be done through rail, which was the rail, which was back then the most important mode of transportation. The line project today, I don't know the exact situation, but the first questions that come to my mind, is it served by mass transit? So to avoid the use of cars, that's the first question that we should take into account. The second question that you would ask yourself is a line versus a more dense urban fabric, or a squarish, or whatever you want to call it. Urban fabric makes more sense for a city. A line, basically, you're creating more distance to cover to go from point A to point B. So to answer that, I don't have all the elements, but I'm skeptical on the form of a city as a line, as a linear urban form versus a more traditional urban form.
We have another question also coming in the Q&A section. Thank you for this interesting lecture and touching on the crucial topic. I would like to ask two questions. How do you imagine a solution of retrofitting an infrastructure that already exists? And then we continue with the other part.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's always solutions, and I would say in moving in our way of thinking and convincing people to get out of their comfort zone is the same way we need to convince people that we need to build less green fields and more brown fields. And this is where projects become more complex. Today, if you take an empty piece of land, that's very easy to build because there's no challenges. But if you take a brown field where you need to solve more complex challenges, this is where you need to get smarter solutions. Same applies to infrastructure. I mean, Paris and Milan showed us a very good example in this tactile urbanism strategy. They had the courage. To try this. I'm not sure if this answers the question.
Yeah, so I think it does in a way.
Sorry, Dr. Ibrahim, can we ask you please to unshare so that we can see you as a full screen, please, if possible?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that answered the question, because if we go also to the other part of the question, you have shown some tactical urbanism solutions in Paris and Milan, but in Dubai and other major US cities, how can you imagine reuse highways and offering solutions to the mobility problems?
Yes, here you go. So this is again, this is very critical. When we talk about paradigm shift, especially in mobility, we're not talking about people letting their cars. I mean, we're not talking about 100% shifting from the use of private vehicles to the use of alternative mobilities. Dubai as a city structure is different from European cities in terms of the built form and in terms of population density. So Dubai looks more like US cities in terms of structure. So in Dubai, the objective is, and in US cities, the objective is not to switch from the use of private vehicles to a complete use of alternative mode of transportation. Those alternatives in terms of cycling and scooters, e-scooters, e-bikes come as an alternative, as a second scenario, as a second option. And the solution doesn't reside in retrofitting the existing infrastructure. but maybe rethinking our land use pattern. I mean, I'm not sure if Hiba is a student in AUD, but for example, look at the place or the positioning of the American University in Dubai, which is just across a metro station. But also look at the other side of that metro station, you would see a golf course. Maybe instead of retrofitting the infrastructure, which is the highway that's just next to that, we need to rethink how to redevelop or to reuse the existing land use, or to transform the existing land use to be more attractive. So we reduce distance, and then people would not require the use of private vehicles. Then it would be easier for them to use alternative mobility solutions. Hopefully this answers the question.
Thank you for the answer. We have a question from one of our professors, Professor Abdel-Latif. Thanks for the talk. We cannot, I'm just reading the comment, we cannot plan Dubai properly without considering the situation in neighboring Sharjah, especially with the flow of people. Is there any cross-border planning ongoing, for example, a metro expansion?
So what I can say on that, 2 points. Locally, if I mean locally, and I mean on Dubai scale, when we were working on the Dubai 2040 urban master plan, I mean, today there's about 1 million people who drive from Sharjah and Northern Emirates into Dubai, and that's massive in terms of workforce. So we were unable to plan the city, the future expansion of the city, without taking into account the flow of people coming, especially from Sharjah. And then, yes, there's a lot of work that's being done on that locally. But then on the federal level, what I know is that there's a lot of work going on at the Ministry of Planning and Infrastructure, if I'm not mistaken, to put in place a national, a kind of a high-level national master plan that's based on mobility solutions to solve or to tackle the inter-Emirates challenges. So yes, there's a lot of work going on that.
Right. I think that's for the question. So unless maybe Dr. George wants to add anything before we end the session.
No, I just want to, thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim, for this informative talk and, all the information that you shared with us. We really appreciate that you took some of your time and came here and talked to us and to students and the community, in Dubai and abroad. So thank you so much for today, and thank you, for the talk.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sami, again for joining us, and thanks for everyone who joined us for today's webinar. I just wish you have a good day ahead. Thank you. I'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.